So I'm very happy to be here with Charles Eisenstein, whom I actually met in Portugal some years ago now. And yeah, I wanted to speak with Charles, not only because he's he's kind of a very original thinker and reflector on the sort of cultural crises and many dimensions of what's going on in our time. But he also did a course or some kind of group specifically to look into a way forward for men. So very happy to be talking to you, Charles.
Yeah, happy to be here, Peter.
And yeah, maybe a good way to start would be, so the documentary we're creating is called A New Men's Liberation. And as I've been doing some research, and finding possible other men and men's groups, initiatives to connect with, I'm actually finding there's a lot going on, actually. There's a lot more going on, I think, in terms of men's development and liberation and men discovering some kind of brotherhood together. More going on than ever, I think. And I think it's reflecting a yearning in so many men to recover or rediscover what a sacred masculine expression could be, because of course, as I'm sure you're aware, we're living in a postmodern, largely the postmodern culture is very anti-masculinity, and there's a lot of messaging about toxic masculinity and all the rest of it. And we're living in a time with all these fracturing kind of identity politics. And God knows how many genders there's supposed to be right now. But I think, obviously, while women have had and still have their challenges, and obviously feminism was a great leap forward, my conviction is that there's a men's liberation, a cultural men's liberation that needs to happen, particularly in Western culture, that hasn't happened yet. There's a cultural, some kind of conversation that needs to happen. So that's really the impetus behind my wanting to do these interviews and also to create this documentary. So I'd just like to get your hit to start off on the state of mankind in our time and what you think the challenges are, and broadly, what direction do you think men need to go in?
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you, Peter. So on a very broad level, what you talked about, this men's liberation movement, I think liberation actually is a good way to think about it. Liberating ourselves first from the old forms and expressions of masculinity that either are no longer appropriate or never were right, or that we've kind of grown out of, that were based on a cultural context that is in a process of rapid change right now. And then secondly, as the obsolescence of traditional, like, macho masculinity, where a real man is someone who never cried or never even felt much emotion at all,
right,
and who was dominating, like all of that stuff, as we recognized that, no, this is not who we want to be as men. The first impulse that came, like, as a cultural wave, was to rediscover our feminine side, thinking that, well, if that's what masculinity is, then it needs to be tempered, it needs to be balanced. We will evolve by developing our feminine side. But that leaves out another question, which is, what is, like, if you take for granted what masculinity has been or has become in modern culture, then there's really no alternative but to repudiate it,
right,
because of all the damage that it's done, all the harm that it's done. But we could also ask, okay, is there an underlying true masculinity or sacred masculinity that has been distorted through the lens of our culture into something that we no longer want.
Mm.
And rather than repudiate masculinity altogether, we could ask, what is the masculine that wants to express itself right now? And who do we want to become, not only as human beings, but as men?
Mm.
And that was another form of the repudiation of masculinity, which is to say, well, gender, binary, all that kind of stuff, that's
doesn't really matter.
that's obsolete thinking, that's not enlightened. We're moving post-binary, and to see that as what progress is. I mean, that would be a pretty deep renunciation of the primal polarity of the universe.
Right.
Electron and proton, yin and yang. Do we really want to go there?
Yeah. And
So
would it be a renunciation or a denial?
Right.
Of something that's just in the structure of creation, that polarity.
Right. And so that denial or repudiation is actually another form of the conquest of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the imposition of a human conceptual and manufactured world onto nature, onto the body, onto the psyche, to become, we're gonna narrate how reality shall be.
Right.
And I think we are reaching the limits of that relationship to the world, which is part of the relationship to the feminine that masculinity has had, like we're the boss.
Right.
Which is really kind of an inversion of what I would say is the sacred dimension of masculinity in relationship to the feminine, where it's in a way, the woman, the feminine is the boss, in that the feminine is the connection to what serves life.
Right.
I mean, on a very basic level, it's, if you have a family, like your masculine abilities and attention is very much oriented on what serves my family. You don't care about yourself as much. You are here for the women and children. So this, it's kind of innate. That is the boss. That is what we are serving. And when various masculine qualities, which here's the mandatory caveat, can exist in women and men both, and come to the fore at different stages of life, yada, yada, yada. Okay, when these masculine qualities are detached from what serves life, the qualities of goal-oriented thinking, linear thinking, abstraction, let's get this done, push past the barriers, bring order to the world, et cetera, like all these like masculine things, when they're detached from life and what serves life, then they take on all kinds of distorted, extreme, and harmful forms, embodied in the hedge fund manager, who's in this realm of abstraction and building up the numbers and so forth, totally unmoored from matter,
right?
The mother, materiality, the feminine. And it's not that the abilities that hedge fund managers and engineers and people like that are using are wrong or bad. It's just that they need to be connected to the feminine and tied back into what they're actually here to serve.
That's great. And as you're talking, it just came to mind the way of languaging this from the East, from the Hindu tradition, Shiva Shakti. And in that tradition, that way of understanding, Shakti is everything that is matter, is energy, is the flow of life. And and Shiva is the, you know, the empty ground, or the pure consciousness in which she appears. And of course, in terms of a more spiritual context and understanding, then you could say the role of Shiva would be to embrace and love Shakti, you know, as a reflection of his own self in form. And so I think it's a cool way you put it, that this fundamental distortion and schism in our culture, and maybe the roots of it go way back. I was thinking of, as far as we know, further back before patriarchy, it was goddess-based spirituality. You know, the female form, the mother, was worshipped as the source of life, of creation. And then, yeah, as you said, well, there's been this whole movement over many thousands of years now of this culture of domination, of control. So I'm curious, what's your sense in terms of that direction, and also particularly then any of the connections or work you've done with men, because you obviously felt this was also a need, you know, in terms of this evolutionary advance, you know, into whatever wants to happen, come into being next.
You cannot, if you feel like you are not fully a man right now, not in the full expression of your masculinity, then achieving that, it's not actually something that you can achieve. Right,
exactly, because that would be the old dominator kind of paradigm of going.
It's not something that you can achieve through an act of will by trying. There are certain inputs that are required for somebody to mature into a man. And really a lot of what I'm talking about here, about masculinity, about the mature masculinity, about being a man, is not in contrast to being a woman,
right,
or femininity. Really, the bigger crisis right now, I mean, large as that relationship is, and important as it is to heal that relationship between the masculine and the feminine, maybe even more important is simply the contrast between boy and man.
Yeah, exactly.
And the psychic food and the experiential food that we need in order to become men, as separate from boys, as distinct from boys, is really not easily available in this culture, which is why many of us will have had the experience of being 18, 25, 35 even, with this sneaking suspicion that I'm not a man. My body is a man's body, have a man's job or whatever, but I feel like a boy playing grown up. And that is because, for one thing, we lack models of real mature manhood in its full expression.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make this too black and white a case, all right? Like, but you know, there are many men who beautifully express certain aspects of masculinity, but culturally we've been truncated in many ways.
Yeah.
So the second thing that we need besides models is we need various initiations. And I'm not talking necessarily about, you know, indigenous initiation ceremonies, coming of age ceremonies. Those are very much to mark the completion of an initiation. The initiation itself is like a real initiation requires that you come face to face with your limitations and be put in a situation where, in a sense, you're on your own. You can't get help from mommy and daddy. You have to become yourself.
Right.
This situation is studiously avoided in modern education, where it's all about training people to seek answers and help from authority. So we have, you know, each generation more than the last of delicate snowflakes who really haven't received the initiation into adulthood, into independency.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like in this context, if you sense a unfulfilled blossoming of yourself, as, and I'm speaking to men here, but similar things apply to women.
Mm.
If you feel in yourself an unfulfilled blossoming of who you are as a man, then first, don't blame yourself and beat up on yourself for it. And second, don't think that this is something you can achieve by trying harder.
Right.
What's important is your recognition of your readiness to receive this initiation, which may be administered by life itself, not consciously administered by any human being, but the uninitiated man will naturally seek out situations that force him to rely on his resources and force him to grow up. And at the same time, will be afraid of those situations, but maybe something unconscious will push you to take risks, to seek out adventure, to travel. Maybe it might be to travel, to stand outside your safety zone, outside of dependency on somebody else. I was recently heard a story about some wilderness skills teacher or something like that, who's so all these young, like all these boys go to him, and go to these programs, and they're doing something, maybe they're chopping firewood or something like that. And one of them, the axe head falls off the axe handle. So what does the kid do? Of course, he goes straight to teacher. Hey, the head fell off the handle, with the expectation that here's a problem, an unknown. So my first instinct is to go to daddy.
Right.
And that's fine if you're 2, okay? But what this teacher said is not my problem.
Yeah, we're in the wilderness here. What are you going to do now?
Yeah, what are you going to do about it? Why do you think it's my problem?
Right.
It's not like I couldn't do anything about it, but why is this my problem?
Yeah.
And he was pointing to this reflex that a lot of us have, when we are so conditioned and dependent on, this is what makes society so susceptible to totalitarian and fascistic manipulation. Like when we're conditioned to look to authority to solve our problems, then all that has to happen is a problem is presented to us and we all of a sudden look to authority to tell us what to do. So this is this recovery of masculinity, and really I'm talking also really just also about adulthood. This is essential to having like a truly democratic and free society. If we don't heal on this level, then no political tweak is going to reverse the course of totalitarianism.
Right. I'm totally with you, Charles. Yeah, no, it struck me as you're speaking, that's that's one side of the initiation challenge is letting go of the dependency of childhood, which I agree. Even many very intelligent people who identify as being very independent, progressive thinkers, it astonishes me actually how easily they'll just go along with what they're being fed by the media or the state. They don't realize they're still looking, they might not believe in a God, a big parent out there anymore, but still there's this projection of some kind of great parent onto the machine of the state. But then I think on the other side is in terms of let's say the initiation ceremony in this, whatever this new context is, it has to do with adolescence, because on the other hand, so many men, and perhaps more so you know, educated, intelligent men, are in this posture of reaction, either reaction to authority, you know, but also one of the ways I think it expresses itself, particularly with men, is this lone wolf syndrome. You know, it's like, well, even spiritually, even men who have some spiritual sensibility, and you know, they're not just, you know, out for success and making it. You know, there's often this sense of, well, I'm going to work on myself, as you know, and this illusion, as you were speaking to earlier, that I can do it. I can do it on my own, you know. And in my work with this, the ALP, the Awakened Life Men's Collective, it's interesting. One way to describe this men's collective and the transformation that men go through is a growing up from childhood and adolescence. And with some men, it's more the childhood, you know, like here in Portugal, because it's a very traditional culture, a lot of the men get pampered by their mothers, you know, and they live at home until they marry, you know. And then, you know, of course, the wife or the girlfriend becomes the mother, you know. So there's quite a lot of that here in Portugal, but, you know, obviously there's a lot of maturity often in men in general in that regard. Also in terms of codependency in their sexual relationships. That goes for women as well, of course. But then I find maybe more particularly with the Northern European, you know, North American men, it's more this challenge of letting go of the lone wolf, you know, and this false sense of independence. And actually, I think the greatest discovery that I experience for all the men that come into this experiment is when they really discover the trust to actually be vulnerable and actually to open up to other men, you know, as opposed to other women. Because I agree with what you said earlier. I think part of the distortion of the whole depolarized postmodern culture is like, well, men and women need to work it out together, you know. But I don't think that's the way it works. I think there is something to these more traditional insights or understandings that, you know, you have the men's tent, the women's tent, you know, the men's culture, the women's culture, and men need other men, you know, and deep, you know, some kind of deeper relationship with other men beyond, you know, having a beer and watching the football, through which to expose themselves and and open themselves up. And so I think that, and of course for many men, the whole idea of vulnerability or admitting that you need help, for example, putting your soul in the hands of another man or group of men, would be defined as weakness, you know, in terms of the sort of more tradition, you know, the male mindset. Well, I'm a man, so I'm supposed to know who I am and where I'm going and how to fix myself. But I just see over and over again when men really let go of that and allow themselves to maybe crumble, fall apart, what they discover is not only this vulnerability and love and connection, but also this strength, you know, that there's actually strength there and courage, which I think is one aspect of this sacred masculine that's longing to be born. But it's like we have to shed the skin of these childish and adolescent maladaptions, you know, and because as you were saying, only when we've really observed, understood, and transcended our childish and adolescent patterning, only then can we stand in that true independence, you know, where we're not leaning on a big daddy or a big money, and we're also not in reaction to a big daddy, big mommy. And you could say then there's that potential for men to discover real communion while inhabiting a really authentic autonomy, you know, and leadership, you know, because I think I don't also, as I get older and the more I do this work, I don't agree with this whole idea that's very common in progressive culture that we just need more women in positions of power, and that's the way the world's going to change for the better. And I think we need more of that for sure. But I think there's something about men really inhabiting that positive pole of not just being equals. You see, it's not just about us being equals. It's about not defining our polarity in relationship to the other pole. And then at least in our work, because there's also a women's collective involved with the Awaken Life project, the women are dealing with their stuff, the men are dealing with their stuff, and then it's amazing to see the more mature people become in that process. When men and women come together, there's a whole new ground that's miraculously free from all that stuff, all that war of the sexes, that is usually going on some level.
Mm-hmm. I could comment a lot on that, but
yeah, well, I was
wondering.
By the way, what I'm curious if you resonate with that.
Yeah, in most ways, yes. It's true that many cultures, that men in many cultures spend most of their time with other men, and women spend most of their time with other women, and we miss that a lot in this culture because these things go so deep. It's not about just changing our ideas about things.
Right.
The entire economic and physical infrastructure is built around the single family home, and our work environment too, and our economy. It's very fragmented. It's very atomic. You don't need the help and cooperation of the people that you interact with socially in order to procure the necessities of life.
Right.
Imagine if we were hunter-gatherers, and as men, and this is true of most hunter-gatherer societies, the men did the hunting.
Yeah.
Like, we're going out together on a hunting expedition, and it's not like this whole thing about making yourself vulnerable. Really, it's about allowing yourself to be seen, and therefore being able to see yourself and not pretend to yourself about yourself. In a traditional culture, you are seen because these are the people you've grown up with your entire life.
Right.
They know you
from the inside out. Yeah.
Yep, through and through. And they knew your father and your grandfather. Like we are held in a matrix of relationship.
Yeah.
Allows us to know who we are.
Yeah.
So it's not like, you have to open up to somebody. That's already a given. And maybe there's further levels of it, of knowing yourself as you grow through life. But there you are in the hunting party, and you don't have to contrive some situation, some team building exercise. Like, you're actually depending on each other.
Right.
And the gifts of every man are important. Maybe one's a better with the spear, one's a better tracker, one is singing the songs, the ritual songs at the right time. I mean, it's a cohesive society. We don't have any of that.
No.
And you can't just manufacture it out of thin air outside of our cultural context by having, a weekend workshop or something like that. I mean, we're really talking about rebuilding culture from the ground up.
Yeah.
And in the context of a global distribution of labor, where, this is related to the dependency thing. Like, if you want something, essentially you go to Amazon or whatever, and you click a button and it comes to you.
Yeah,
It's
right.
very much like asking mom and dad for something. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, you have to make the money and stuff, but the things you do to make the money are utterly disconnected from the process by which the bag of corn chips arrives at your doorstep.
exactly. Yeah.
And that didn't used to be true. You know,
Yeah.
you used to have to plant corn and harvest it and grind it and all that kind of stuff. Either you or somebody who you saw doing that, who was intimately connected with you. So a lot of the dysfunction in masculinity and our lack of maturity and manhood is part of a vast cultural context
Yeah.
that you cannot undo in just one dimension.
Sure.
All of it has to go along with all of it.
Mm.
And we're deep, deep, deep in this territory of separation.
Mm.
And the walk back is a long, long walk.
Mm.
But there is a walk back. And we can, knowing how deeply lost we are, we become attuned to the way.
Yeah.
And we become attracted to things that we recognize as part of the healing
Mm-hmm.
of in every dimension, part of the healing of masculinity, for example.
Mm.
And so part of it, you know, in these men's groups, if we take into it, it's not so much I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable. Like, why? Why do you want to be vulnerable?
Mm.
Like, part of masculinity is focus on a goal.
Right. With this,
What is the
spear
actual
in hand.
goal? What is the actual goal?
Mm.
Let's be honest with ourselves. That's actually a good start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe the goal is, I want to stop pretending.
Yeah, and also I'm remembering what you said earlier about going beyond or discovering your limitations. First of all, discovering your limits, and then going beyond them.
Yeah.
Because that's a good question you asked, you know, why be vulnerable?
And this is something men can do for each other.
Yeah.
Okay. They can refuse to comply with your belief in your own limitations.
Exactly.
It's like that guy, fix it. Fix it. Don't ask me to do it. Where does that come from? That comes from knowing that you can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
My high school track coach offered a bit of this. You know, it's like, okay, boys, we're going to do repeat quarters, 10 quarters, 65 seconds. I'm like, I can't do that. Well, he knew better than I did what I could do.
Yeah,
and put me in a situation where I discovered capacities beyond what I knew.
Yeah.
Like that. And that is a classic form of masculine mentorship.
Mm.
You know, it's not like indulgent.
Right. And it's yeah, I'm struck by the example with the school teacher there. Actually, what flashed in my mind was a physical education teacher I had who we were all very afraid of.
Yeah.
You know, this was in a boys' school. And I remember, you know, we're doing laps, you know, running around the track or whatever, you know, and I remember I was insisting I had a cold, you know, and I was just being a wimp, you know, and he basically comes out with a cricket bat, you know, and whacks me around the back of the legs and keep going, you know, like snap out of it, you know.
Yeah.
And and then I was just flashing on a community I was a part of, you know, we got into this thing, the men, we'd all get together once a month on a Sunday and we'd do these push-up marathons.
Uh-huh.
And the idea was you could rest, but you had to stay on your feet and hands, you know, you couldn't put your body on the floor. So you could do some push-ups and then rest for a bit, you know, and we all went way, way beyond whatever we possibly thought we could do. You know, I've also been a marathon runner in the past, and there's something about this, you know, because there's the drive to achieve, you know, and therefore dominate and compete, which has its when it's out of touch with the wider picture, which we were talking about earlier. But there's also something really life affirming and you know, so important in terms of bringing real courage online when men really go beyond their limits and are pushed beyond their limits
Right.
together. And I think there's something about it when it happens with other men and by other men, because it's like men intuitively know, oh no, you can go further, or you can go beyond that, even if they haven't done it themselves, and then one person does it and it brings something forth in the other. And so it's really quite, it's quite something to discover that there's a healthy competition,
Right.
that actually leads to a deeper communion.
Yeah. Let's not be too quick to throw out everything from our legacy, from the old society. These things, as I said before, they may have become distorted, but they're coming from an authentic place and they have a long history. I want to say a little bit more about my coach, just an anecdote that illustrates this. So his name was Mr. Horner, rest his soul. One time, a promising athlete comes to the workout, Todd, his name was, and Todd's got some talent, but he's not in shape, and we're doing repeat quarters. And
what does that mean, repeat quarters?
Okay, you do your one lap run, at a certain time, and then you rest for half a lap or a lap, usually half a lap, and then you do another one, and then you do another one until the coach tells you that you've done enough. Usually it'll tell you at the beginning on how fast you have to do each one, and if you don't make the time, it doesn't count.
I see.
Okay, so Todd, after like 4 or 5 of these, he's had it. He's like, this is his first day of practice. Mr. Horner, I quit. And Mr. Horner says, oh, no, you don't. Not until you finish these quarters. So he literally wouldn't let him. Now, did he actually use physical force to make him run around the track? No.
Right.
But he created a field of expectation that as a young man, Todd could not shy away from.
Right.
He was speaking to the part of him that wants to be a man.
Right.
And is not sadistic.
Yeah.
Although sometimes we suspected Mr. Horner of sadism, but it's actually not sadistic.
Yeah.
It would only be sadistic if you knew he couldn't do it and you made him try anyway.
Yeah, or you just in hurt, you
Right.
wanted to hurt somebody.
But what he wanted, in his way, he loved us and he wanted to see us fulfill our potential.
Yeah.
And it pained him to see us malingering or, feeling sorry for ourselves or indulging in our supposed weakness. He just would not put up with that. And that's something, so a mentor or a coach figure can do that for us. And then as we mature, then we also do that for each other. So competition is similar. Healthy competition, it's a way to reveal to ourselves our strengths and weaknesses. And you're in a competition, part of it is that you try your hardest.
Right.
Take it seriously, even though on some level, it's a game. You take it seriously because the question is, what am I capable of? What am I not capable of? What if, suppose, I decide that I want to be a world-class discus thrower. I could lift as many weights as I want and train as much as I want, but there's no way that I would ever come close to Jay Kislak, who was the best discus thrower on our track team. And if he decided that he was going to be a miler, there is no way that he would ever come close to me in the mile.
Right.
Competition can show us that. It can free us of our delusions about ourselves. It shows us the honest truth. And that is also what we can do for each other as men in a men's circle, in a men's group. We refuse to put up with each other's shit. And it's not out of domination of each other. And I'm going to call you on that. It's an act of service to each other.
Exactly.
Because I know that you don't want to be mired in your own bullshit either. And I and we, the circle, we're going to call you into responsibility. We're we're not going to accept your excuses
Exactly.
because they are lies.
Yeah.
We see you as beyond what your excuses are telling you.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're really conveying it very powerfully. It's something about the essence of real brotherhood is it's the initiation, you know, that you brought up at the beginning, you know, the initiation of like, you know, you are going to go beyond this limit, you know, and we are here to hold you, you know,
But not to do it for you.
yeah, but not to do it for you.
Nope.
And you know, you have to walk through the fire. Actually, in terms of indigenous dimensions, you know, one thing we always do on our men's retreat is a temescal and you know, sweat lodge, and something we've done before is the fire walk.
Yeah.
And really, you know, really bringing an intention to that, like, okay, so what am I going to burn up, you know, as I walk over these coals? What are my fears, you know? And so, yeah, we've definitely found that some of those more, you know, ceremonial archetypes, they can be inhabited by a modern Western man with real power, you know. And
yes,
and also, like, being in a sweat lodge together is completely pitch dark, you know. It's super hot, you know. Sometimes people just like, all they want to do is get out of there, you know.
yeah.
It's like, no, you got to hang in there with your brothers. And also the physical contact, I think that's another dimension, is because we live in such a kind of, well, on the one hand, you've got the whole kind of gender bending going on, but then you've got the homophobia that a lot of men have in terms of experiencing any kind of real physical affection.
Right, because
something to allow yourself to be physically held by another man.
Right, because everything's been sexualized.
Yeah.
You know, when I spent a lot of my young adulthood in Taiwan. First time I went there, you know, I see men walking arm in arm a lot, you know, and I'm like, wow, gosh, a lot of gay people here. But no, they weren't gay at all. They were affectionate to each other. In fact, and they didn't have, like, homophobia. Actually, it isn't really, the root of it isn't fear of gay people. It's actually fear that oneself is gay. Right. And it is, you know, therefore, unclarity in your own masculinity. And, you know, I'm not saying that you know, if you are a gay man, then you're not masculine. I mean, I do think this is a dimension of masculinity, but you know, I mean, and I'm speaking as someone who's, you know, pretty much 100% straight, but, you know, still like this, so this sexualization of all touch, like it's part of the like the simplification of the world into these like rigid categories. I mean, there's so much more. I mean, this goes way beyond, you know, issues of masculinity. But yeah, like, I'm not sure exactly what I want to say about it, but I'm just resonating.
Well, I've got a thought to interject in here, which is bringing something in you brought up earlier about the whole thing of the dependency, you know, on the mother or the great mother, or, you know, men who are longing for that kind of, well, because we're you know, everyone is longing for love, you know, but longing for that, looking for it in the feminine, and therefore looking for it in our relationships with women, whether they're our sexual partners or just friendships. And this was definitely my case, and I think it's the case with a lot of, you know, more so-called sensitive, spiritually interested men. You know, I had a big reaction to most of the sort of what I regarded gross behavior of men, you know. So through my 20s, most of my close friendships, or any of the relationships that went deeper than, you know, getting high and playing music or whatever we would do, it was with women, you know. Right. And then you know, and then of course one of the tricky things was the sexual dimension would get mixed up with that. But I think, just to bring it back to what we were talking about in terms of this, how everything's been sexualized, and yes, that I think a lot of men find this some kind of consolation or some kind of there is this longing for love, and but because they're looking for it in women, and then of course there's the whole sexualization of all relationships. So you have a woman friend who you love deeply, you're intimate with, but you're not necessarily wanting to be in a sexual relationship with her. That's kind of dodgy territory. Yeah. And it was only when I really discovered, became part of a men's group and discovered this kind of brotherhood, that it was just such a relief. It was just like, wow, I don't have to look for that greater relational depth, and freedom to express affection in women, or only with women. And it was such a liberation to find that with other men. And I think it breaks something in terms of this whole childish dependency on one hand, and also the unhealthy polarity where we're looking to be completed by the other. So as a man, one's feeling a fundamental sense of, look, I'm not really a man yet, or like you were saying earlier, even if you've got running a company or whatever, on some level men feel like I'm still a boy, but they're looking for that growing up process through their relationships with women. And that just gets very complicated, especially when the women are doing the same thing from the other side.
Yep. We're in the thick of it, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now I've just come back from this 1,000-kilometer bike ride around North Portugal. And where I went is the more traditional areas where the traditional culture is still very strong. And there's something about it, you feel this sense of contentment, in the people. And the men all hang out together. The women hang out doing their whatever they do. The men are hanging out playing dominoes. And, superficially you could say, oh, that's just so old fashioned. But there's something, you can feel that healthy sense of polarity and belonging, and you get talking to people and it's like they've lived in this village their whole life, and their grandfather, like you said, I met one woman, old woman, and she hasn't even seen the ocean, Wow. And so I think it's something about this cultural embeddedness that's only very recently, and it's only been a century or so where we've been completely torn ourselves away from that context, and it's all about nuclear families. And so I like what you said about there is a way back, and it's a long way back, but we once we make room for that longing, then we do know what to do, or life will bring us the opportunities to find that way back.
It's a long way back, and we don't have a map.
No, exactly.
But we can recognize the next step.
Anyway, well, thanks a lot, Charles.
My pleasure.
Talk about this. Really good to talk about this. So, wish you all the best, and keep on keeping on with your work, which many, many people I know are very inspired by.
Thank you, Peter.
And thank you for doing your bit to bring into being the better world we know in our hearts is possible.
The phrase is, the more beautiful world our hearts know.
The more beautiful world we know in our hearts is possible. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Take care.